Cheap Tickets wants to thank you for defending our country all over the world. Cheap Tickets wants to help you take a trip of your own. We believe the best trips in life are cheap. And as a proud supporter of the U.S. military, they want to offer you flights, hotels, car rentals, and even event tickets for less because you deserve it. Visit cheaptickets.com/military and take 18% off hotels. Offer is valid for active duty service members, veterans, military reserves, and the National Guard. Cheap Tickets thanks you for your service. cheaptickets.com/military. Now more than ever, you need reliable news you can count on. Since 1861, Stars and Stripes has been committed to bringing you the news without the spin. We believe in the First Amendment, and we're damn proud to have been there alongside you wherever you were deployed, keeping you connected. Today, we're only a click away. Go to stripes.com, use promo code podcast, and get 50% off your subscription. 50% off. There are some folks out there that think Stars and Stripes is a little old-fashioned. Well, folks, maybe right now, we need a little old-fashioned. Go to stripes.com and get reconnected with a legacy of news without the spin. Stripes.com.
Good morning to everyone except the U.S. Army leaders who haven't read and reflected on the report yet. Oh, we got a shady Sergeant Major of the Army this morning. Let me go and see what he's talking about then.
That's Sergeant First Class Aston Muse. She's what you might call Facebook famous. She's an online comedy personality, often making hilarious videos about life in the Army and her experience as a drill sergeant. But in one of her latest videos, she turned her comedy towards something very serious.
Report of the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee. This is 152 pages. 152 pages, they better have some new stuff in here. Nope, it's all the same. There was a pervasive lack of confidence in the SHARP program among soldiers. The implementation of the SHARP program at Fort Hood has been ineffective due to a command climate that failed to instill SHARP program core values below the brigade level. Then what were all those PowerPoints for?
Did that make you squirm a little in your seat? A little too much truth in that statement?
Again, is this just Fort Hood? Like, is that all we're focusing on right now? Like, they're saying findings, but I don't think they know the meaning of that word. Most of this stuff has been going on since I've been in the military. Are they just now seeing it?
The Fort Hood Independent Review Committee report took the spotlight that had been put on Fort Hood and turned it up. In this episode, we're revisiting the cases of Guillen, Waddell, and Rosencrantz to see where their cases are now and to talk about the case of another dead Fort Hood soldier, with investigations that have direct links to the findings in the Fort Hood report. I'm Rod Rodriguez. This is Military Matters. Before we begin, I would highly encourage you to go back and listen to episode 1 and 2 of season 2, The Slaying of Vanessa Guillen and Soldiers' Deaths and Fort Hood Silence.
So the update out of this report on Vanessa Guillen's case is not too extensive.
That's Stripes reporter Rose Thayer. She's been covering Fort Hood for a few years now.
There are some details that came out in this that show a little bit of how maybe the CID investigation did not do the best work they could have.
Vanessa Guillen's disappearance and murder wasn't enough to spark the national outrage that we saw. It was her family's plea to the public, her mother wailing in agony and her family broken on national television, that brought the much-needed attention to Fort Hood's dangerous and abysmal conditions. I want my daughter found alive, for the love of God, alive, and that all of those responsible fall, whether you're a colonel or a sergeant, it doesn't matter. They should be investigated from the lowest rank to the highest rank, because they are all responsible, all of them, because they covered up the investigation. The prime suspect in Vanessa's murder was shot outside of Fort Hood's gates in Killeen after fleeing on foot from the barracks he was being constrained to. His then-girlfriend, 22-year-old Cicely Aguilar, has been arrested and is accused of helping Vanessa's killer get away with his crime.
So she goes to court. She has on January 5th, she has a hearing where she can take a plea deal. It's her last chance for that. And then on January 19th, her trial would be scheduled to start, and that's in Waco, Texas. this trial's already been delayed twice, and it's really in her best interest to keep delaying this, because as long as Vanessa Guillen's case is at the forefront of everyone's mind and the details of the case, she might be concerned about, the jury selection.
Parts of the Fort Hood report speak directly to Vanessa's case, and for that reason, the reports do have some spots that have been redacted. One of the most scathing findings that singles out Vanessa's case has to do with a lack of interdepartmental communication within CID itself. On page 60 of the report, a detailed example is given of how individual agents questioning suspects and witnesses didn't communicate with each other, share their findings, or build off statements. They were all basically flapping in the wind, doing their own thing. On top of that, those agents weren't collecting electronic evidence properly.
For example, Vanessa, the last person that she texted with before she went missing on April 22nd was Specialist Robinson. Fort Hood CID, when they interviewed him, they didn't search his phone. They didn't take photos of the text on his phone. They didn't do any of that sort of investigative work to preserve any evidence that would have been on his phone on April 22nd. I think it was about 30 days later before they actually did a forensic, investigation of his phone to see what information was on there.
Agents aren't sharing findings with each other. Electronic evidence isn't being collected correctly or timely. What else can go wrong?
Something I didn't know is CID investigators are warrant officers in the Army, and so they're subject to PCS, deployment, all these other things that, a normal soldier is subject to. So the lead investigator on the Vanessa Guillen case was up for PCS in the middle of the case. And the Army didn't say, no, let's leave him here to finish because this is a really complex case. They PCS'd him, even though on the outside, civilian police departments were like, no, we want him to stay. So, you really just, it loses all that history and the knowledge that he had. It also described how the people doing the investigations or the interviews, going around in Vanessa's unit and talking to soldiers to understand who saw her, when they saw her, they weren't coordinating. So when one soldier would say something that potentially should be used in the next interview, that wasn't happening, which is really, I think they said it was just a lack of investigative experience. Most investigators at Fort Hood in CID only had about 2 to 3 years of investigative work. Another example was collecting evidence. They didn't really know what things to keep, what things to, they didn't know how to write requests for search warrants, how to go to a magistrate judge and ask for a search warrant. And sometimes they would ask for the wrong thing. So they had all these fruitless searches where there was nothing there. So they were really wasting time.
It sounds like we're beating up CID here, but honestly, the report doesn't necessarily just point to CID being the only problem. They were suffering from issues internally that resulted in poor performance. The Fort Hood report uncovered that between fiscal years 2018 and early 2020, the average staffing level of onboard agents was around 65% and dipped to as low as 45%. Remember, these agents are also covering one of the most populated U.S. military installations in the world, with approximately 65,000 soldiers and family, as well as thousands of civilians, and all of the crime that comes with having all of those people. Here's another record Fort Hood has: the highest number of drug test failures in the Army. Fort Hood's failure rates are over 30% higher than divisional posts and 151.7% higher than non-divisional CONUS posts. CID had their hands full, to say the least.
Sort of blew my mind was they don't have any administrative staff. They don't even have evidence technicians. So they were taking these people that had really extensive investigative training. They've invested money to make them investigators, and they have them doing paperwork and they have them filing evidence, which just seems like such a waste of resources.
The Fort Hood report points to a number of issues with CID in finding number 4 of 9, titled, "The Fort Hood CID office had various inefficiencies that adversely impacted accomplishment of its mission." This finding perhaps has the most relevant and direct impact to all of the cases that have arisen in the last couple of years. CID was flooded with cases. They were undermanned, under-equipped, and inexperienced.
We had contacted them in May saying we had found the car or had found where it was in January.
That's Kimberly Waddell, mother of deceased Fort Hood soldier Gregory Waddell. Gregory's remains were discovered in a field several miles outside of Fort Hood after CID received a tip. The Waddell family had found their son's missing car through a Carfax report and informed CID that they thought they knew where Gregory's vehicle was.
And they said, well, we've had it since January. And that's when they told me not to call back anymore, that they weren't going to discuss the case with me. I later found out that the car was actually towed 4 days after he went missing. So either CID or Killeen Police didn't put something in the system to say track this car, or the tow company ignored it, or something happened there, because all evidence in this car is gone now. I mean, they detailed it. They threw all of his personal belongings away. It was basically erased, everything erased and sent to auction.
The Waddells and Guillans share not only the pain of losing a child, but also the frustration of a system that wouldn't work with them till public pressure made something happen. When Gregory's remains were found, you would think the decent thing to do would be to grant his family a military funeral. But the Army had labeled Waddell a deserter. They did this without any evidence to support Waddell had intent to never return. In fact, Waddell had been scheduled to separate from the Army days after he was reported missing by his unit. It made no sense for the soldier to go AWOL, risk deserter status, and lose the benefits he had spoken to his family about using. By all accounts, his deserter status was approved in order for the unit to drop him from their roles. Little effort was made to find him. In fact, the tip only came in after Guillen's case gained national attention, and Kimberly had to fight to get a reward offered for information leading to her son's whereabouts. The Army only changed its mind about Waddell's deserter status after public pressure.
So I got a phone call from Colonel Disney that said that based upon new evidence in the investigation, that they had decided to change his status. And I was excited. My son was coming home. And I posted something on Facebook, and I sent an email to Detective Mueller saying, I heard there was new evidence. Just wanted to see, is it something that's really going to help, or is it just something clearing up, something else? And he said, what new evidence? So Detective Mueller told me there was no new evidence. Senator Inhofe talked to my dad and said all the publicity and everything going on, that they had just decided to do the right thing and reverse his AWOL and deserter status. I don't know which version's true. I don't know any of that. And at that point, I didn't care anymore. I was just happy he was going to be home.
I asked Kimberly if she'd read the Fort Hood report, and she said that she'd read parts of it, especially the parts that talk about CID's shortcomings, which she has experienced personally through her son's case.
When Chris Swecker also said on C-SPAN that there was obvious clues that were not followed up on and evidence that was left uninvestigated in all of the cases, it just infuriated me that the Army, which is supposed to be this, massive place with all this training, has this crew of young people with no experience running something as critical on a base that large, especially something as critical as CID. They don't know how to, it was obvious they didn't know how to handle crime scenes or how to handle investigations or interviews.
Gregory Waddell was laid to rest with full military honors in July of this year. Today, his murder continues to go unsolved. She says CID doesn't return her messages and flat out told her not to call them. Today, Killeen Police Department's Detective Mueller is Kimberly's only source of information to her son's case, and she fears they will never see justice.
I just need whoever knows what happened to come forward, or even if they've heard rumors about what happened, to come forward and let other people sort out what's fact and fiction. It's a year and a half now. It's time to come up with some answers, and somebody knows something. I just beg them to come forward.
If you have information about the death of Gregory Waddell, contact the Killeen Police Department at 254-501-8830. When we return from the break, we revisit the death of Fort Hood soldier Brandon Rosencrantz, and we'll also talk about the death of Sergeant Elder Fernandez, another case with direct ties to the findings in the Fort Hood report when we return. Cheap Tickets wants to thank you for defending our country all over the world. Cheap Tickets wants to help you take a trip of your own. We believe the best trips in life are cheap. And as a proud supporter of the U.S. military, they want to offer you flights, hotels, car rentals, and even event tickets for less because you deserve it. Visit cheaptickets.com/military and take 18% off hotels. Offer is valid for active duty service members, veterans, military reserves, and the National Guard. Cheap Tickets thanks you for your service. cheaptickets.com/military.
The thing about it is, my friend, I have my rough minutes, but I know that before all that, I owe Brandon the right to know who killed him.
That's Thomas Burke, the father of slain Fort Hood soldier Brandon Rosencrans. That audio you just heard is from a few months back when we recorded for episode 2 of the podcast. I reached back out to him for this update, but unfortunately, he was in the hospital and unable to do the interview. I did speak with Libby Hill, a moderator for the Justice for Brandon Rosencrans Facebook group and family friend. We messaged back and forth about Brandon's case. Brandon Rosencrans was found dead from a gunshot wound back in May. Since Thomas and I last spoke, there have been some developments in Rosencrans' case. Brandon Michael Oliveras, 28, has been arrested and charged with first-degree felony murder, and Estrellita Falcon, 37, has been arrested and charged with unauthorized use of a vehicle and hindering apprehension and prosecution. Libby tells me that if new evidence isn't presented soon, that Falcon could walk away from the murder charge completely. They're asking the public for help with information that could lead to new evidence that will help convict her as well of Rosencrans' murder. I asked her about the role CID has been playing in the investigation, and she said that they have not played any role in the investigation, that it's been the Harker Heights Police Department that's taken lead on this case. I won't pretend to know how jurisdiction plays into this or who's responsible for what, but I was surprised that CID didn't have even a slight role to play in this investigation. She did say that they were not mad at Fort Hood. Like Thomas had also stated during our interview earlier this year, they were focusing simply on trying to collect information. But she did describe the complete lack of CID involvement as being very bizarre. If you have information about Brandon Rosencrans' death or information about Estrellita Falcon, please contact the Harker Heights Police Department at 254-953-5400. A lot has happened at Fort Hood this year. The spotlight seems to have bounced around a lot from case to case, each death bringing to light another Fort Hood issue. I want to turn our attention to the death of Sergeant Elder Fernandez, a Fort Hood soldier who was missing for more than a week before his body was discovered hanging from a tree in Temple, Texas, 28 miles from Fort Hood. His death has been ruled a suicide. But what would compel this 23-year-old service member to kill himself?
So what I was told was that Sergeant Fernandez had a staff sergeant supervisor who was harassing him and stalking him.
Stripes reporter Rose Thayer.
And had at some point touched him in a way that he felt was abusive sexual contact. So he reported it to his unit, and then he was moved into a different unit where he then felt like he was victimized for filing the report.
Lieutenant Colonel Chris Brodigham, a 1st Cavalry Division spokesman, told NBC News, quote, "We can confirm there is an open investigation of abusive sexual contact involving Sergeant Fernandez, and that a unit sexual assault response coordinator had been working closely with him." End quote. Natalie Qualm, the Guillen family attorney and former representative of the Fernandez family, told USA Today that Fernandez had reported in May that he had been inappropriately touched by a male superior. He was transferred, and word spread within the new unit, leading to harassment, belittling, bullying, and hazing. She would also go on to say, quote, "He was humiliated. He was embarrassed. He couldn't even tell his mom. He didn't want to tell anyone. He was afraid, and he was ashamed by this." End quote. So let's talk about how this was handled by CID.
Sergeant Fernandez took this information to his unit, and it was investigated, and the staff sergeant took a polygraph test that he apparently passed, that he was telling the truth And so the Army closed the case, the unit closed the case because they said, well, he can pass a polygraph. It must have not happened.
Sergeant Fernandez files the report, and what should have been an investigation goes the route of a polygraph. Special Agent Damon Phelps of the Army Criminal Investigation Command told USA Today, quote, "The subject of the investigation took and passed a polygraph investigation, and we found no witnesses that could corroborate Sergeant Fernandez's allegations," Phelps said. There was a thorough legal review and the allegations were unsubstantiated, end quote. Representative Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts, during a House committee hearing, expressed concern over how much CID agents relied on polygraphs. There's a very good reason that polygraphs aren't admissible in court. It's because they're very subjective. The whole process hinges on the questions that are asked and how they are asked. Passing a polygraph doesn't mean you didn't do it. As for a thorough legal review, well, there really wasn't any incentive to find the truth. The faster CID could get through a case, the faster they could close the file, as long as it was administratively complete. That puts the case to sleep, and they can move on to the next one. Understaffed, under-equipped, and inexperienced. But there's another factor here we have to talk about, and that's the role of the Sexual Assault Investigator, or SAI. The SAI brings much-needed specialized skills, experience, and continuity to a detachment. According to the Fort Hood report, the current formula allocates one civilian SAI for every 36 crime cases open per year that met the criteria for case initiation. The allocations stop when the staffing level reaches justification for 3 SAIs or 90 cases. So you can't get more SAIs after you get 3. Those 3 SAIs should be able to handle at most 30 cases per year, so 90 total. The Fort Hood CID opened approximately 342 to 359 sex crime cases annually between fiscal years 2018 and 2020, and could justify an allocation of 9 to 10 SAIs, yet it only has 3. These 3 sexual assault investigators should be handling 90 cases between them a year, are facing 300 plus. How thorough of an investigation or legal review can we possibly expect? No wonder they turn to the polygraph. In fact, it's almost better for the investigator to get a negative result on the poly, proving the accused is telling the truth, so they can say unsubstantiated, next. Something missing from the Fort Hood report that I wish had been addressed is how CID success was determined. After 20 years in the Army, I can attest to the power of metrics. If a unit's sexual harassment numbers are null to low, then that's considered a win, ignoring the fact that low numbers could mean unreported. In that same respect, I don't doubt that cases closed probably meant a lot to CID leadership in regards to officer and non-commissioned officer evaluation reports. How you're judged to be doing a good job will have a lot to do with what you'll do to keep your job, get promoted, and get the hell out of Fort Hood. Last thing to note in regard to Fernandez's accusation of being sexually assaulted. Even if this had gone to trial, what he probably didn't know was between 2018 and 2020, the successful prosecution rate for abusive sexual conduct was 33%. For rape, 11%.
But again, now that we know what we know about CID, were they using phone pings at the time, cell phone pings, because he had his phone on him? Were they, using investigative tools to get a search warrant for his financial records? Was he using his credit cards? These sort of things, we don't really know if those were happening in the background.
According to the Fort Hood report, Fort Hood has high suicide attempt and suicide death rates relative to similar posts. First-term enlisted soldiers arriving at Fort Hood between 2015 and 2019 have the second highest attempted suicide offense rates, 0.91%, which is significantly higher than the average rate among divisional posts at 0.39%.
Like, I guess my main question is this just something for Fort Hood, or, because, we got other posts. They should change that to the report of the Fort Everywhere Independent Review Committee.
We open today's show with parts of the Sergeant First Class Muse's sketch reaction to the Fort Hood report. She ends her sketch with a personal story of sexual harassment and fear, a story that is all too familiar to the men and women of Fort Hood. In her sketch, she says this could be called the Fort Everywhere Independent Review, and I think she's right. This report should make us all cringe, squirm, and look at our leadership. The report talks about substandard housing, moldy barracks, toxic leaders, understaffed law enforcement, bureaucracy over efficiency, and a culture of keep your mouth shut, don't make waves, and move on to the next post. It will be better there. The report is more than a checklist of what's wrong with Fort Hood. It's an indictment of the Army culture we've all let progress. We're all guilty of letting this go on because we've all been afraid of what the Army will do. From denying promotions, denying PCS moves, to vindictive Article 15s, and being singled out by your unit. I've seen all of these things firsthand, and on a few occasions I've said something. But in too many, I didn't. What really bothers me isn't just the Fort Hood report, but what I gathered from investigating the deaths of Guillen, Waddell, Rosencrantz, and Fernandez. Talking to grieving parents about justice they'll never see, hearing the stories of anger and fear. What I walked away with is a finding of my own. And you can add this to the Fort Hood report and make a solid 10 findings. My finding is this. The Army repeatedly chose to do nothing, or the minimum for soldiers and their families, until the public pressured them to do the right thing. And no one's going to step up and own that. No general, no sergeant major is going to tweet, "Sorry we tried to cover this up, that was wrong." We wouldn't know Vanessa Guillen's name had her family just accepted what CID had told them. Vanessa Guillen's death became a catalyst for change. It was the spotlight on a fort that had hidden its inadequacies and failings behind a shroud of secrecy. Interesting that an army that claims to be looking forward spent millions of dollars on fancy brown uniforms reminiscing about the past, when it could have used that money to build a better future through real funding for SHARP, a fully staffed CID detachment, modern investigative equipments, and labs. None of those shortcomings was unknown to our leadership. Not one of those things was a surprise to anyone. They were willfully ignored till tragedy mandated correction. But hey, I've been told since day one, perception is reality. So we can all wear our fancy brand new uniforms, knowing that as long as we look good, everything is fine, nothing to see here. So good morning to everyone except U.S. Army leaders that haven't read and reflected on the report yet. Good morning to Vanessa Guillen, Gregory Waddell, Brandon Rosencrantz, Elder Fernandez. Good morning, indeed. This episode was written and produced by Rod Rodriguez. Special thanks to Stripes reporter Rose Thayer for her help in putting this episode together. Thank you to Kimberly Waddell, Thomas Berg, and Libby Hill. And finally, thank you to Aston Muse for letting us use her sketch and for sharing her deeply personal story with the world. Be sure to visit us at stripes.com and use promo code podcast to save 50% on your digital subscription. That's promo code podcast to save 50% on your digital subscription at stripes.com. This episode is sponsored by Cheap Tickets. Go to cheaptickets.com/military. Get 18% off hotels. Offer valid for active duty service members, veterans, military reserves, and the National Guard. The best trips in life are cheap. cheaptickets.com/military. I'm Rod Rodriguez, and I'll see you at the next season of Military Matters.